Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 19, How Web Browsing Works. In this lesson, I'll show you a few illustrations that depict the way that your computer interacts with the web. This information will be useful background information in later lessons when we discuss tips for safely browsing the web. Some of you may be watching this video as part of a course that uses this textbook. If you are, you should know that the illustrations we're going to examine here are all in Chapter 7. If you aren't using this textbook, then don't worry about it. Just follow along with the lesson. Let's take a look at the first illustration. It depicts some of the primary ways that your computer interacts with the web. Let's start over on the left side of the illustration. This largest box represents your whole computer. In your computer, there's an application called a web browser that allows you to interact with the web. Popular web browsers include Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Internet Explorer, but there's other options out there as well. One of the primary functions of a web browser is to request and display web pages for the user. That function is represented by the green box that says HTML Viewer. What is HTML exactly? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the primary code used for writing web pages. We'll look at HTML a little more closely later in this lesson. For now, all you have to see is that web browsers translate web pages from HTML code into graphical displays that we can see on our computer monitors. Web browsers contain many other functions besides simple HTML display capabilities. Your browser probably has a PDF viewer so that it can display PDF files. It may also have a Flash plugin, which allows it to view a variety of online animations written in Flash. Browsers have many more applications like this that allow them to take advantage of the diverse capabilities of the web. In this illustration, these applications are all lumped together into the green box labeled Internal Executables. Your web browser is also linked to other applications on your computer, not just internal applications on the web browser. For example, your web browser might detect a song or a video that's embedded in a web page, and so it might automatically access a media player from your computer so that it can view that media on the web. Your web browser also has access to a couple different kinds of data storage. One kind of data storage is called cache. Cache helps a web browser to load web pages more quickly. When a web browser loads a web page for the first time, it has to download all of the data from the web server so that it can display it for the user. Web browsers will keep some of this data in cache storage so that the next time the user needs to access the web page, it will load more quickly. It already has some of the data in storage. Another kind of storage is the general file storage for your computer, such as the storage space available on your hard drive. Your web browser can download documents and applications from the web, and it can store those documents and applications in the storage space on your computer. And then you can open or execute those files later without being connected to the internet or even having your web browser open. Now let's start working our way over to the right. There's a red arrow connecting the web browser to the web server. This arrow is labeled HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is the communications protocol, that is, the communications rules used for communicating HTML code. Now, you may remember, in an earlier lesson I said that computers communicate across the internet using a set of rules called Internet Protocol, or IP. Now, you might be wondering, well, which is it, IP or HTTP? Technically, the answer is that computers need to use both IP and HTTP in order to access web pages. IP is necessary for communicating anything at all across the internet, whether it be a web page or something else. But HTTP is an additional protocol that's only necessary to communicate web pages. As you can see in the illustration, the HTTP arrow runs both ways. HTTP defines the rules for your web browser to communicate with the web servers, and it also defines the rules for the web servers to communicate back with your web browser. Moving further to the right, this diagram includes a web server. The web server is a storage computer that's located somewhere else on the internet. It's a remote computer containing a document called a web page, and your web browser is the application that allows you to access the web page from your computer. In this illustration, it kind of looks like your computer has a direct connection to the web server, but remember that that's not really the case. Between your computer and the web server is the whole internet, a vast system of networking devices. The web server contains web pages, and web pages contain two different kinds of content: static content and dynamic content. What's the difference between static content and dynamic content? The main difference between the two is how interactive they are. Static content is less interactive. It stays the same every time you access it, regardless of what you do with it. Text and photos are examples of static content. Text and photos are often meant to stay the same for every user who accesses them. Dynamic content, on the other hand, is interactive. It's usually some kind of interactive program embedded in the web page. Because it's interactive, dynamic content is potentially different each time you access it. A good example of dynamic content is a restaurant's web page that lets you build and order your own burrito online. Okay, that illustration gives you an idea of how your web browser interacts with web pages. Now let's take a closer look at the HTML code that web pages are written in. Here on the left, we have a simple web page. And over on the right, that's the source HTML code for this web page. That source code is what gets stored in the web server. Your web browser accesses that code, and it interprets and displays the code for you in a page resembling the one here on the left. For this particular web page, the first 6 lines of code are setup code that gives the browser information about the web page. There isn't much in these first 6 lines that's particularly important for us right now. I will briefly mention 2 things though. First, for this web page, the setup code is only 6 lines long, but for most professionally built web pages that you would interact with on a daily basis, there would be a lot more code than you see here. This is just an example. Second, I want to point out that the title of the web page is written between these 2 title tags here. Notice that the title is what is displayed in the tab on your web browser. Technically speaking, the title of a web page is this text that's displayed in the tab on your web browser. So, if you're ever trying to cite a web page for a paper, now you know where you can find the official title of a web page. Let's move down to the code contained between these 2 body tags. The code between these 2 tags defines what the bulk of the web page looks like. We can see a heading at the top of the web page that reads sample web page, and if we look over at the code, we see that the heading corresponds to the information between these H3 tags. Everything else on the web page is contained between a series of P tags. In web coding, P tags like this define paragraphs. A new P tag tells the browser to skip down a line and begin displaying a new paragraph of content. As we can see, each P tag here corresponds in order with another line of content over on the web page. Now, I want to show you 2 significant features of HTML that have security implications for you and me. The first is the difference between local images and remote images. You see, if you build a web page in HTML, one option is for you to upload your own images for the web page onto the same server where you're uploading all of the other HTML code. These are called local images. This first picture of a fish is a local image. The person who built this web page uploaded this image to the web himself or herself. However, HTML also has the ability to display images from other web pages in your web page. This isn't always legal, depending on how you use other people's images, but in principle, it's very easy to define a remote image from another web page as the image to be displayed on your web page. This second picture of a fish happens to be a remote image. Somebody else uploaded it to a different web page, but whoever built the web page that we're looking at has written the code so that it will take this image from somewhere else on the web and display it here. If you look over at the HTML code for this web page, you can see the web address where this picture is being hosted. If you are just looking at the web page, you can't tell whether an image is local or remote. You have to view the source code to make that distinction. So how is the distinction between local and remote images significant for cybersecurity? Well, some cybercriminals will build fake web pages that are intended to look like web pages from your bank or another trusted institution. They may use remote images from the trusted institution's web page to make their counterfeit web page look exactly like the original. You can't really tell that an image is from a remote source if you just look at the page itself, but if you learn some basics of HTML, it's not very difficult to check if a suspicious web page is relying on remote images like this one. All web browsers will allow you to view a web page's source code, so in theory, you could check for remote images on any web page. Let's look at one more feature of HTML that is relevant to cybersecurity. In HTML, it's extremely easy to lie about the destination of hyperlinks. Here, you can see the title of a hyperlink in black. That's the part that gets displayed on the web page. Over here in blue, you can see the actual web destination of each hyperlink. So this particular link is labeled dishonestly. It claims to navigate to CNN.com, but really it takes you to www.dougj.net. Criminal web pages and also scam emails will frequently contain misleading hyperlinks like this. They're designed to trick you into visiting malicious web pages that you wouldn't normally visit. The good news is that web browsers will tell you where a hyperlink really navigates to. All you have to do is hover the mouse button over the hyperlink without clicking on it. A small box should pop up somewhere on the browser window, and it will tell you where the link will really take you. Okay, that's all for now. In the next lesson, we'll continue discussing security topics that are relevant to web browsing. Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 20, Safely Navigating the Web. In this lesson, we'll discuss 4 web safety issues: handling files on a web browser, accepting cookies from websites, using a more secure version of HTTP called HTTP Secure or HTTPS, and keeping and deleting a web browser's history. Safe browsing issue number 1 is handling files. Some of you may be watching this video as part of a course that uses this textbook. If you are, you should know that we're about to examine some illustrations from Chapter 7 of this book. If you aren't using the book, then don't worry about it. Just follow along with the lesson. This diagram shows how Alice's computer interacts with files from the web. If you understand how a web browser interacts with files from the web, then you will stand a better chance of avoiding malware from the web. Let's examine this diagram beginning on the right side of the page. Web pages are a type of electronic document, and they are stored on remote computers called web servers. Your computer accesses web pages on web servers through the internet. The red line in this image represents the internet connection between Alice's computer and the web server. Now, you may remember that when computers communicate, they can only understand each other if they stick to a strict set of communications rules, and these rules are called a protocol. The web browser on Alice's computer and the web server are using a protocol called Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. Web browsers and web servers almost always use HTTP to communicate with each other. The most common exception to this rule is that some web pages use an encrypted version of HTTP called Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, or HTTPS. We'll talk about HTTPS a little more later in this lesson. For now, I just want you to see that when you browse the web, your web browser and a web server somewhere are trading information back and forth using some version of HTTP. When your browser sends out a request for information, the web server will normally return some web page that you have asked for. The web page itself is coded in a programming language called Hypertext Markup Language, or HTML. A major component of the web browser, then, is the HTML interpreter, which allows the web browser to decode and display web pages that are written in HTML. In this image, notice that Alice's whole web browser is represented by a red box, and the HTML interpreter part of her browser is represented by a smaller black box within the web browser. The HTML interpreter is part of the web browser, but the web browser does more than just decode and display web pages written in HTML. When the HTML interpreter reads through the lines of code for the web page, it will occasionally find non-HTML files embedded into the HTML code. For example, it might find a video file, or a PDF embedded into the web page. Videos, PDFs, and other embedded files aren't written in HTML code, so the HTML interpreter cannot display these files without some help. Alice's web browser has several plugins, that is, several helper applications that are programmed into the web browser itself to help it to interpret non-HTML files that are embedded into web pages. In this image, we see that Alice's web browser has three kinds of plugins. Executable plugins run programs embedded into web pages, programs written in coding languages like JavaScript. Document plugins allow Alice to view documents, such as PDF files, straight from her web browser. Viewer plugins allow Alice to view or listen to other image, audio, video, or graphics files from her web browser. Sometimes, Alice's web browser will encounter a file embedded in the HTML of a web page that it's not able to interpret with either its HTML interpreter or with any of the other plugins that it has available. When this happens, the web browser might ask a helper application located somewhere else on Alice's computer to open the file. Alternatively, Alice might choose to download a file from a web page. When she does this, the file is downloaded onto her computer, normally someplace on her hard drive, and she can open that file later, even if she is disconnected from the web server or from the internet altogether. So, as you can see, Alice's web browser encounters a number of different file types, and it can handle those file types in a number of different ways. As a user, Alice has some control over how her web browser handles files that are embedded into web pages. Let's imagine for a moment that Alice uses the Firefox web browser. If Alice opens the Options window in Firefox and selects the Applications tab, she can control what action her browser takes when it encounters any given type of file. For example, she can control whether the web browser will execute the file automatically, or if it will ask for permission first. In this illustration, we see that Alice's web browser is set up to automatically open several file types with Adobe Acrobat. We can also see that Alice's browser is set up to open various audio-visual files automatically with a QuickTime plugin, which is also located in her browser. However, whenever her browser encounters a compressed folder, it will ask for permission to open it or to save the file. Alice doesn't want her browser to automatically open or to automatically save compressed files. She wants to process those files manually. This next illustration shows how Alice can change the way that her computer handles files. In Firefox, she clicks on the bar displaying the action for a given file type, and a menu drops down with several options. She can command the browser to always ask her how to handle a given file type, or she can command it to always save a given file type to a particular location, or she can command the browser to always open the file. Her browser is recommending that she always open Microsoft Word documents using Microsoft Word. But if Alice prefers a different word processing software, she can specify that a different program besides Word handle these files. Alice can adjust these settings for any file type that she might encounter in her browser. So, what should you do? Should your browser automatically open files embedded in web pages, or should it ask you for permission first? Now, obviously, the most convenient option is to allow the web browser to just automatically process files. If it's automatic, then you don't have to think about it. But because some files might contain malware, automatically executing all files is also the most insecure option. The best thing for security is to pick and choose manually which files your computer opens. You will have to strike a balance between security and convenience based on your own computing habits and your own needs. Do you encounter a lot of files from unknown sources? If so, you probably want to screen those files. But do you stick to relatively few, familiar, and trusted web pages? Then maybe for convenience sake, you could allow your browser to open files automatically. Now, you may not use Firefox, or maybe you do use Firefox, but our images may have become outdated because of a recent upgrade, which is very possible given the speed at which technology develops. But no matter which web browser you use, it should allow you to control how it handles files one way or another. So do some exploring and figure out how you can do that in your web browser. Safe browsing issue number 2 is cookies. Cookies are small files that websites leave on your web browser. Cookies allow websites to remember users' behaviors and preferences on a given website. They enable a lot of the features that web users like. For example, cookies are what allow websites to remember whether or not you're logged in with your user account. Cookies also allow shopping websites to remember what items have been placed in a user's shopping cart. Furthermore, cookies are simple text files, so they can't contain any code that would run a program, and therefore they cannot execute malware infections on your computer. So cookies are great for convenience, and they are malware-free. But cookies have a downside too. One particular kind of cookie, called a tracking cookie, can track user activity across the internet. Many users feel like tracking cookies are a violation of privacy. For example, if you shop for baseballs on baseballgear.com on Monday afternoon, you might notice that a new website starts showing you ads for baseball bats and gloves on Monday evening. These targeted ads imply that your behaviors are being observed and shared between websites and between different companies. This is made possible by tracking cookies. Tracking cookies are ultimately all about advertising. As you can imagine, advertisements are much more valuable if they're tailored towards your personal interests. The more targeted the ads are to you, the more effective the ad usually is. That's why advertisers advertise toys during children's shows and beer during football games. The people who are interested in children's TV shows are statistically more likely to be interested in toys, and the same people who are interested in football games are statistically more likely to be interested in beer. Tracking cookie companies pay websites to run software that writes tracking cookies onto your browser. These tracking cookies can collect information about you on any website that runs the software by the tracking cookie company. Over time, the tracking cookie company builds a profile on the user behavior associated with your web browser, and it can use that profile to direct targeted ads to your browser. It reads the cookie, it observes your browsing behavior, and it says to itself something like this: I see that you've been reading about baseballs and buying baseballs. I guess I should show you these baseball bat advertisements because it seems likely that you're the kind of person who'd be interested in buying a baseball bat. Another issue with cookies is that they can allow users to stay signed in to online accounts on their browsers. Now, on the face of it, there's no major issue here. Why would it matter if you stayed logged in on your own private computer? Well, it only becomes a problem if somebody is allowed to snoop through your computer. For example, you might leave your computer in a public place. Or, more likely, you might leave your computer out at home during a party or a gathering. Or, if your boyfriend or girlfriend has access to your computer, then they might have automatic access to your accounts. In any of these situations, somebody else could use your active login information to access your online accounts. So although cookies are more convenient for you, keep in mind that they're also more convenient for people who snoop through your computer. And of course, if you're using a public computer, then make sure that it does not remember the password for your online accounts. You don't want people in public to log into your private accounts. One final security issue with cookies. If you are using an unsecure wireless connection, then eavesdroppers can intercept cookies sent to and from your computer. If the cookie in question happens to be an authentication cookie that's used for logging into an online account, then the eavesdropper can save this cookie and use the information on it to log into your account later. Safe browsing issue number 3 is HTTPS. Earlier, I mentioned that web browsers communicate with web servers using a protocol called Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. Regular HTTP is a set of rules that governs the way that code is sent back and forth between web browsers and web servers. Regular HTTP sends code back and forth in clear text. That is, the code is easily readable for anybody who has access to it. So if somebody happens to be eavesdropping on your browsing session on an unsecured wireless network, they can easily read any information that is sent through HTTP. There is another protocol called Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, or HTTPS, that adds another step to the HTTP protocol. Instead of sending code back and forth in clear text, HTTPS adds a step of encryption. If you navigate to a web page using HTTPS, then the website encrypts all of the code that it sends to your web browser, and it gives your web browser a unique key for decrypting that code. Eavesdroppers will still be able to see your traffic on an unsecure wireless network, But if your browser and the website are communicating with HTTPS, then the traffic between them is unreadable for the eavesdropper. The eavesdropper will only intercept an encrypted mess of unreadable, garbled code. Many web pages use HTTPS for their login pages so that your login credentials are secure as they move across the internet. If you're going to submit sensitive information online, you should make sure that you're using web pages that use HTTPS. Most web browsers display the address bar differently for a web page that uses HTTP than it does for a web page that uses HTTPS. Here's what the difference looks like in Firefox. The page on top uses HTTP, and the page on bottom uses the more secure HTTPS. Notice the green padlock and security certificate on the HTTPS page. Here are the same two pages shown as they would display on Google Chrome. Again, HTTP is on top and HTTPS is on bottom. Notice once again the green security certificate and padlock icon on the HTTPS page. You should be aware that HTTPS helps to protect you from wireless eavesdropping, but HTTPS can't protect you from malicious websites. Not every website that uses HTTPS is necessarily safe. Bad guys can use HTTPS too. It's just that using HTTPS will protect you from wireless eavesdropping. You should still proceed with caution on websites that you do not recognize and trust, even if they use HTTPS. Safe browsing issue number 4 is browser history. As you probably know, your web browser normally keeps a complete record of which web pages you have navigated to. This history can be convenient. It helps you to remember things that you have read online, and it helps you to navigate to frequently accessed web pages more quickly. But like most convenient things, browsing histories trade security for convenience. Your browser won't differentiate between sensitive and non-sensitive information. It will keep a complete record of all of it. Anybody who cares to snoop through your browsing history will be able to see what you've been doing online, perhaps including where you do your banking, whose Facebook pages you have visited, or what kinds of medication you've been researching. Web browsers on public computers will normally default to recording your browsing history too. If you use a public computer, say one at a library, then practically anybody can see what you were doing after you leave the computer. There are 3 primary ways to control your browsing history. The first is to delete your history. Your browser should have a delete history function, and all of the most popular browsers will give you some control over what you delete. For example, Firefox will allow you to clear your history going back different amounts of time, an hour, a week, etc. And it will allow you to clear all of your history at once, or to just focus on one specific kind of information: cookies, browsing history, data typed into online forms, etc. The second way to control your browsing history is to limit what kinds of information your computer gives, receives, and remembers. For example, in Firefox, you can control whether the browser remembers your browsing and downloading history. You can also control whether the browser accepts cookies and how long it retains those cookies. The third way to control your browsing history is to use the private browsing setting in your web browser. The private browsing setting normally opens up a new private browser window. When you decide to close this window, it will automatically delete all of the history and cookies that you picked up during that browsing session. When you open a regular browsing window again, your browser will default back to whatever default settings you normally use. Okay, to review, we covered 4 web safety issues in this lesson: handling files, accepting cookies, HTTPS, and browsing histories. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about the most common security issues that we face when we shop online. Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 21, Online Shopping. Online shopping is big business. With so much money being exchanged, it's no surprise that many criminals target online shoppers. Many of the security issues that we have discussed previously are relevant to online shoppers. In this video, we'll address 11 online shopping security issues: avoiding malware, using strong passwords, using trusted computers, avoiding unsecure wireless networks, avoiding malicious adware, avoiding phishing websites, distinguishing legitimate retailers from illegitimate ones, using a link scanner, researching a retailer, withholding information, and finally, paying with plastic. Online shopping issue number 1 is avoiding malware. In previous lessons, we talked about how to protect yourself from a number of different kinds of malware: viruses, worms, Trojan horses, and bots. Some malware attacks are directed specifically at online shoppers. So, before you shop online, it's a good idea to make sure that you're employing the defense in-depth strategy outlined in Lesson 18 of this series. Do you remember what that strategy entails? Back up your data, run a firewall, make sure that your software patches are all up to date, run antivirus software, represented here by a guard dog that blocks viruses from getting into a computer, and be an educated user, somebody who knows the old threats, but who also keeps up with new threats as they appear in the news. I won't say much more about these layers of defense here. If you would like to review them in more detail, you can go ahead and rewatch Lesson 18 in this series, which is titled Layers of Defense Against Malware. Online shopping security issue number 2 is using strong passwords. Online shopping accounts are sensitive accounts. Many of them grant users access to your credit card information. They also usually have a shipping address on file, which would tell somebody where you live. And because they might keep a record of your purchases, these accounts also give users an idea of how much money you spend and what kinds of valuables you might have in your house. So it's important to use a strong password if you set up an online account with a retailer. Strong passwords make it more difficult for cybercriminals to compromise your shopping accounts. Lesson 11 gave you advice for creating strong passwords. Rather than rehash all of that advice here, I'm going to refer you back to that lesson. Online shopping security issue number 3 is using trusted computers. Refrain from doing your online shopping, or from divulging any financial information at all, on untrusted computers, especially on public computers. It's relatively easy for a cybercriminal to install keyloggers onto a computer. A keylogger can record all of the keystrokes that you make on a computer, and so it picks up things like usernames, passwords, and credit card information that you plug into a website. Furthermore, there are other kinds of spyware that could potentially lurk on untrusted computers. You don't want anybody spying on your financial transactions, so stick to private computers that you trust. Online shopping security issue number 4 is unsecure wireless networks. We have already discussed some of the dangers of unsecured wireless networks, and we will discuss them in even more detail in upcoming lessons. One of the main security issues that comes along with unsecured wireless networks is wireless sniffing, which is the practice of intercepting information traveling between a computer and a wireless router. Because of these dangers, it's best not to shop on unsecured wireless connections. Online shopping security issue number 5 is malicious adware. In Lesson 16, we touched on the dangers of malicious adware. We explained that many advertisements are legitimate, but some advertisements aren't. Malicious advertisements try to trick people into clicking on them, and then those advertisements direct people to a malicious website, such as a phishing website or a website containing a drive-by download. So be shrewd. If an ad presents an offer that's too good to be true, then it's probably not a legitimate offer. Before you click on any ads, always hover your mouse arrow over the link to check the URL that the link navigates to. If an advertisement says that it's taking you to, say, an Amazon or an eBay affiliated webpage, but then the URL it displays is not from Amazon.com or eBay.com, then you should not click on the advertisement. In fact, it's a good idea not to ever shop on a web page that you navigated to through clicking on a hyperlink. It's better to type the retailer's URL into the address bar for yourself. This will give you an added layer of assurance that you're shopping where you want to shop. Online shopping security issue number 6 is phishing websites. In lessons 10 and 14, we touched on the dangers of phishing. Phishing is a trick where a cybercriminal tries to convince a victim to divulge his or her sensitive information, such as usernames, passwords, or bank routing numbers. We examined a phishing email which claimed to be from Chase Bank, but which really contained links to a website that was intended to steal users' banking information. Cybercriminals will do the same trick with online retailers. They will send out emails containing links to fake retail web pages that are intended to trick you into divulging login information or banking information. Here's an example of a phishing email claiming to offer popular products at deep, deep discounts, which are well below market value. If you get emails like this, just delete them. They are probably phishing emails. Legitimate businesses won't discount their goods 80 or 90% from market value. Successful companies don't become successful by losing money on every single sale that they make. Online shopping security issue number 7 is distinguishing legitimate retailers from illegitimate ones. How can you tell the difference between a legitimate and an illegitimate retailer? I just mentioned that some illegitimate retailers will claim to sell popular, high-demand goods for incredible discounts. But there are other cues to look for when assessing a retailer. Here's the homepage for a fictional retailer, lowlowprices.com. Let's pretend for a minute that Low Low Prices is a real, legitimate retailer. How could you be sure that this is the real homepage for Low Low Prices? One obvious cue is to check the URL up in the address bar. If you wish to shop at lowlowprices.com, but the URL says something different, like lowlowprices.cn, then you should suspect that the page that you're on is a counterfeit. Another cue to look for is HTTPS. Legitimate retailers should always use HTTPS to log you into your account or to accept payments. Any website that does not use HTTPS for these functions is unsafe and probably malicious. Now, some malicious websites will go so far as to use HTTPS. What this means is that the presence of HTTPS is not a foolproof assurance that the website is trustworthy. However, you can take the absence of HTTPS as an assurance that the website is not trustworthy. Even if a retailer has only good intentions, if they don't use HTTPS, especially for logging in and for accepting payments, you know immediately that they're not using adequate security practices. Stay away from such retailers. Another cue to look for is whether a retailer asks for too much information. For example, retailers don't need to know your social security number to complete a transaction. If they ask for it, there's a good chance that they are up to no good. Online shopping security issue number 8 is using a link scanner. One tool that can help you to shop more safely is a link scanner. So, what's a link scanner? Link scanners are applications that you can add onto your web browser. Link scanners check hyperlinks against a security database, and they tell you if there's any known security issues with the web pages associated with each hyperlink. There are several link scanners to choose from. One popular example is Web of Trust. Web of Trust displays color-coded circles next to hyperlinks. These circles tell you whether or not the web page has a good security reputation. For example, I have Googled the phrase Iowa State University Information Security. Web of Trust has marked each of the top 5 hits with a green circle. This tells us that these links have a good security reputation. Of course, this isn't an absolute guarantee. Web of Trust is capable of making mistakes. But the green circle is a strong indicator that the website is probably trustworthy. But here, I have Googled the phrase free iPad. The first hit is marked with a red circle, which means that the link is known to be untrustworthy. The second hit is marked with a gray circle, which means that Web of Trust has little or no information about this link. The website has no reputation one way or the other. The third hit is marked with a green circle, which means that Web of Trust users have reported that this web page is trustworthy. But I have to say, I'm skeptical of this particular link. First off, notice that the URL for this web page is doctorsandtobacco.org. I don't know anything about that URL, but I'm having a hard time seeing what Doctors and Tobacco would have to do with free iPads. We can also see from the Google preview that this page includes the sentence, "Everyone who participates has over 40% chance to win a free Apple iPad." That promise is obviously too good to be true, so I think common sense dictates that we should avoid this link, even though Web of Trust has marked the link as safe. If we want to learn more about a link's rating on Web of Trust, we can click on the circle next to the link. This takes us to a Web of Trust scorecard page for that link. Here, we find a clue that might explain why such a fishy-looking link has a good rating from Web of Trust. We see here that Web of Trust has very low confidence in this rating. So, as far as Web of Trust knows, this is a safe link, but Web of Trust admits that it doesn't yet have very good information on this particular link. It's possible that this link is a scam, and the scammers themselves could be the ones who gave the link such a high rating. Online shopping security issue number 9 is researching a retailer. If you would like to make a purchase through a retailer that you've never used before, you should do a little research on the retailer before giving them any of your financial information. Here are some things to look for. First, their website should have a phone number. Legitimate businesses will usually have a phone number that you can call so that you can ask about their business practices. Second, the retailer should have a physical location somewhere, at least an office or a warehouse. So where are they based? If they don't have a physical location, then they're likely to be illegitimate. Third, you should look up some online reviews of the retailer. If other people have shopped there before, then some of them have probably left reviews somewhere online. Try Googling them. But be careful. Sometimes scammers will write positive reviews of themselves and then post those reviews online. Online shopping security issue number 10 is withholding information. Another way to protect your sensitive information is to give retailers as little information as possible. Don't show them everything about you. Hold back as much as you can. Even if you trust a retailer, it's always a good idea to withhold as much information from them as you can. If they ask for information that's not required to make a purchase, such as your date of birth or your gender, withhold that information. In all probability, they just want that information so that they can use it to direct ads at you anyway. So there's no harm in holding it back. And if a retailer asks for your social security number, stop interacting with that retailer immediately. Social security numbers are never necessary to make a purchase. Only crooks ask for a social security number to complete a purchase. Online shopping issue number 11 is shopping with plastic. You can further protect yourself by opting to shop with a credit card instead of a debit card. There is inherently nothing more secure about credit card technology, but it's an accident of American legal history that credit cards offer better fraud protection than debit cards do. Because of the way that federal laws ended up being written over time, consumers are better protected from credit card fraud than they are from debit card fraud. As you can see in this table, both credit card users and debit card users are not liable for fraud if the fraud is reported before the stolen card is actually used. So you're safe if you notice that your credit card is missing and report it as missing before somebody else uses it. But a cardholder may be held liable if the fraud is only reported after the card is used. Users of either kind of card are only legally liable for up to $50 worth of expenses if the fraud is reported within 2 business days. However, there's a sharp jump after 2 business days for debit card users. Debit card users are legally liable for up to $500 of fraudulent charges if the fraud is reported within 2 to 60 business days. Credit card users, though, they are still liable for only up to $50. It's worth noticing here that in either case, after 60 business days, you could be liable for unlimited amounts of fraudulent charges. Furthermore, it's a good idea to check your credit card statement and your debit card statement once a week. Now, your bank or your credit card company has software to help them to detect fraudulent charges. Now, this is convenient for you, but it's still important for you to monitor your own debit and your own credit card accounts. Criminals know that banks and consumers are more likely to notice large, conspicuous purchases, so sometimes they'll try to limit themselves to smaller, less noticeable purchases so that they can use the stolen card for a long time before anybody notices. So check your statements for yourself too to make sure that your bank hasn't missed something. Okay, that's all the advice I have for you with regards to online shopping. To briefly review, we addressed 11 issues: avoiding malware, using strong passwords, using trusted computers, avoiding unsecure wireless networks, avoiding malicious adware, avoiding phishing websites, distinguishing legitimate retailers from illegitimate ones, using a link scanner, researching a retailer, withholding information, and paying with plastic. In the next lesson, we will begin discussing a major issue in cybersecurity, that is, wireless network security.